Antarctic Developments Program was a United States Navy operation back in the 1940s organized by Rear Admiral Richard E. Byrd. The operation commenced on August 26, 1946 and ended in late February 1947. The task force contained over 4,000 men, 13 ships, and 33 aircraft. Even though the public reason for the operation was to, quote, establish the Antarctic Research Base, Little America, many believe its true purpose was to investigate an entrance found toward the center of the continent that may have led to an inner Earth. Much of this information has come from Mr. Byrd himself, with tales of having his Navy fleet attacked by saucer-shaped craft that burst out of the icy oceans, nearly destroying his entire fleet before finally escaping. Admiral Byrd was later quoted as saying that our primary threat here on Earth isn't the Russians, but from something located down near the South Pole that have the capability of attacking North and South America at will and with very little warning.
It's not what you see above ground. It's not even what you see in the ice flows, the ice fields, or the buildings above the ice. The different stations from different parts of Antarctica, the Norwegians at Troll, the McMurdo base, all of these different bases have a purpose, but the real purpose is under the ice. Not only the empire beneath the ice, but the world kingdoms of this world are responsible primarily to one entity. In the Antarctic, everything seems to be centering around ancient energy fields, ancient energy sources. We are hearing rumors today of massive intelligence presence by different nations and different intelligence agencies, as if they're scouting the land to prepare for whoever's coming. Now, I would like to think that it's not a permanent issue, it's a visiting issue to get clued in. And one person sent me an email yesterday or the day before, and he said, Steve, have you noticed that Gog and Magog? He said, have you ever put that into perspective? Now, let me share my perspective on Gog and Magog. It's a little different. Obviously, I know Ezekiel, I know the prophecies. But there's a reason why the city of London chose Gog and Magog, two literal giants in history, especially in British Isle lore, to be the patron saints of that whole country within a country. And for those of you who don't understand, the city of London is like the Vatican City. It's its own country, has its own abilities, capabilities, etc. He said, have you considered that Gog and Magog could the armies coming from the north and the south and converging in the middle, could be those hidden armies that are both under the ice in the Arctic and Antarctic. Remember, Admiral Byrd said that the flying craft could fly from one pole to the other in a matter of minutes. The most powerful and the richest bankers of the world, the kings of the earth, and let's just go one step further, the kings of the world who dictate to the kings of the earth, or maybe I should say the kings off-world that dictate, it's all pointing to a massive revelation. It's all pointed to a massive decimation of normal thought patterns, understandings of history.
Antarctica has really become a major subject in recent, well, in fact, in the last year, even more so. There's been every kind of conspiracy theory that it is a place for a massive alien base. This is where aliens go at. We know of the one of the former military officers, Byrd, who fought a conflict near Antarctica and lost a lot of men, claiming that there were flying discs, flying saucers coming out of the Antarctica. And just there's all kinds of evidence that is legitimate evidence that clearly seems to show that the Antarctica is certainly a base of some sort. The Germans also, under Adolf Hitler, had a base down at Antarctica. There's all kinds of things that are going on in this region of the world, and this year, actually last year, when the election, John Kerry himself disappeared down to the Antarctica during the very day of election. But what was really strange is that when John Kerry went down there, he goes to New Zealand right afterwards, and there was a massive earthquake inside of New Zealand. I'm going to share with you, you can see some of the images here on this article here from the New York Times. They'll show you some of the images of the earthquake itself. 7.8 magnitude earthquake. The earthquake was very, very shallow, and in one article that we saw that would probably be considered satire, that they have written and stated that the reason why the earthquake happened was because John Kerry did a last-ditch effort and went down to Antarctica to try to meet with the, well, as they put it there, he was meeting with the Guardians. And the Guardians had rejected his plea to put Hillary Clinton in the White House. Instead, Donald Trump would become the next president of the United States. Now, I realize that does. It sounds so far-fetched, sounds so crazy, in fact, to even think of that. And then, of course, they said that the earthquake at New Zealand, where he went immediately after the Antarctica visit, was a warning to him not to come back again. Well, that's what they also said in the article. Those of you that remember, here is a picture here of the Patriarch Kirill. Patriarch Kirill is also the head of the Eastern Orthodox Church, who went also to Antarctica on a very unexpected trip after he met with Pope Francis in Cuba. And Pope Francis gave him a secret document. Never was revealed exactly what was in the document, but it was the first time the two leaders of the both East and Western Orthodox churches had met together to try to mend their relationship. He goes to South America afterwards, and then the unexpected trip to Antarctica. Well, the question is, why did he go to Antarctica? Well, in one article here, the Ark of Gabriel, Antarctica, Russia, and the Apocalypse, speaks about how that the Russian government had actually moved a mysterious ark that was discovered at Mecca underneath the ground there and was brought out. Many people died in the process, according to the article's claim here, and that Russia did a special movement of this ark down to Antarctica. Now, again, whether we would say this is just a bunch of garbage or if it's really true or not, I'll just leave that up to you. But maybe what I'm going to share with you in a few minutes might weigh in on your thinking. So I do ask you, just kind of bear with me a little bit here while we discuss these things here. Anyway, at Mecca, if you remember, I believe it was last year, there was a quote-unquote stampede. And the news reported that some 700, in one case 717 people were killed in this stampede. This is something that has never happened before at Mecca, and actually we found out later that it was 2,000 people were killed there at Mecca. And an apparent stampede that killed all of these people. Well, not according to some of the articles there. In fact, as you can see this crane here that is toppled, that what was actually going on at Mecca was an excavation of this strange ark called the Ark of Gabriel, that according to the article here, this was something that Muhammad had said, had prophesied about. And this was buried here beneath this very place, and they were working on trying to bring it out, and some type of plasma release was done, and it caused the death of all these people. Again, is this just conspiracy theories? Is it fabricated? Who really knows? But one thing that is a fact, though, is there was a Russian ship, a scientific ship, headed to Antarctica, and that ship did stop at the port there in Saudi Arabia, supposedly to take on supplies. Well, as you know, Saudi Arabia is not necessarily the greatest friend of Russia, but they did it anyway, right? So then, after that, the ship goes to South Africa and then on to Antarctica. So they did stop and pick something up in Saudi Arabia. So maybe the article has got some truth in it after all. And then right after this ship goes to Antarctica, this is when Kirill suddenly goes down there to visit the one and only Eastern Orthodox Church at the Antarctica. So just too many strange things are happening.
I received an email from a retired 60-year-old U.S. Navy petty officer, first-class flight engineer. He asked me to only call him Brian to protect him because he works in an aerospace company today. He entered the U.S. Navy in 1977 and retired 20 years later in 1997 from the military. He and his C-130 crew encountered high strangeness in Antarctica from 1995 to 1996 several times. They all saw rapidly moving silver discs over the trans-Antarctic mountains. Brian and his crew also saw a huge football field-sized hole in the ice only about 5 to 10 miles from the geographic South Pole that was supposed to be a no-fly zone. But during an emergency medevac crisis, to speed up their trip, they flew across that no-fly zone and saw apparently what they were not supposed to see. A huge hole in the ice that looked like it was an entrance to an underground installation. Later at camp near Marie Birdland, some dozen scientists disappeared for 2 weeks. When they reappeared, Brian's flight crew was assigned to pick them up, and all were silent and appeared scared. Brian and his C-130 crew received orders to not talk about the silver discs or the huge ice hole or the missing scared scientists. Repeatedly, the crew was sternly told that they did not see what they kept seeing, but Brian was never asked to sign an official non-disclosure agreement. So now that he's retired from the Navy while still working in civilian aerospace, Brian wanted to share what he has seen and experienced with me at Earth Files because he is convinced that an alien presence is living and working on this planet. We had never met until Thursday evening, June 2nd, 2016, at the Contact in the Desert Conference in Joshua Tree, California. We organized to meet with his nephew, Kelly, and a friend to talk about Brian's Antarctic experiences. We all went to a local Mexican restaurant, and after dinner, we kept talking until after midnight outside in the restaurant parking lot under trees. That weekend, while I was still doing lectures, workshops, and panels at the Contact Conference, Brian returned to his home in Phoenix, Arizona. On Monday, June 6th, he was back at his aerospace job, which he has always kept confidential. I don't have a number there to call him because he wants to keep his job protected. But that morning, Brian received a surprising and disturbing phone call that he describes now.
The voice on the other end of... I was back at work on Monday after the conference, and my cell phone rang at about 10:30, quarter to 11 in the morning, and the voice on the other end of the line said, "Is this Brian?" And I said, "Yes, who's this?" Because I didn't recognize the number. It says, "I want to tell you that what you've been talking about, you need to stop talking about." And I said, "What stuff was that?" And he says, "We know that you were with Linda Howe on last Thursday night, and we know that you went to dinner at a Mexican restaurant in Joshua Tree, and we were aware of what you were talking about with her and other people, and that your experience that you had when you were on the ice, when you were in the service, we don't want you talking about that. Specifically, we don't want you talking about the scientists that you picked up after being missing for a couple weeks." And I said, "How would you know about that? I've only talked to certain people." And the voice in the phone said, "Well, we know pretty much everything." And then they said, "Just don't be putting that out there anymore. Certain people would prefer that you not talk about that." And then I said, "Well, I'll consider that." And then the phone went dead. There was a click. Whoever on the other end hung up. I was like, wow, this is out of the blue.
What did you do next?
Well, I was kind of curious, so I took the number off my cell phone and Googled it on the internet. It came back as the general phone number for the NSA.
The National Security Agency in Fort Meade, Maryland.
Yes. I called Kelly, my nephew, and he Googled it too.
Why would you get a threat specifically using my name now in June of 2016?
The only thing that I come up with is that report that's been going on the internet of that British documentary team that was down there in Antarctica,
right?
Something that was found under the ice. that team went missing, and they have not found those people since. Possibly that documentary team was in the same area where those scientists went missing for those 2 weeks, and that somebody doesn't want putting two and two together and going, well, you know, there's people down there that went missing for 2 weeks back in the 90s, and now these people are missing and haven't been found yet. Maybe there's a correlation there.
The British documentary footage that Brian is referring to was first reported in a March 18, 2002 press release from the Atlantis Mapping Project in Washington, D.C. that began, quote, "The U.S. government said it will seek to block the airing of a video found by Navy rescuers in Antarctica that purportedly reveals that a massive archaeological dig is underway 2 miles beneath the ice," close quote. The video was allegedly the property of a Beverly Hills company called Atlantis TV that produced the Atlantis Mapping Project channel for the BBC in London until 2015 when it was closed down. The March 2002 release also said that the Atlantis TV crew had disappeared and that 2 U.S. Navy officers had found the missing production crew's videotape, quote, "in an abandoned supply dump 100 miles west of Vostok Station," close quote. That would be near the South Pole. The AMP press release said the video shown to National Science Foundation researchers at the South Pole's Amundsen Scott Station showed a pyramid and, quote, "other spectacular ruins and things they could not go into," close quote. Allegedly, Navy SEALs came in 1 or more helicopters to take objects away. Officials of the U.S. Naval Support Task Force in Antarctica denied the story and said the Navy did not possess any video shot by the missing Atlantis TV crew. But at the same time, there was another U.S. legal action in 2002 to block the release of a hardcover book entitled Raising Atlantis by Tom Grenius, a novel based on fact. The book is about a secret U.S. military expedition that discovers ancient ruins 2 miles beneath the ice in Antarctica. The government allowed the first e-book version in the spring to be released with sensitive information about U.S. underground continuity of government installations, but blocked the hardcover release until the sensitive information was deleted. Could that big ice hole that Brian and his C-130 Navy crew saw near the South Pole in 1995 and the later incident in early 1996 of the missing National Science Foundation scientists be linked to the 2002 Atlantis Mapping Project news release about the missing documentary crew and videotape of pyramids and other structures beneath the ice? If the U.S. government is trying to cover up the discovery of pyramid and other structures 2 miles below the ice near the South Pole in Antarctica, the secret would be revolutionary, because the last time the entire Antarctica continent was free of ice is generally considered to be about 15 million years ago. So any advanced architecture on land beneath the ice would be that old as well. Brian, would you have ever suspected that we were being spied upon and listened to in both the restaurant and where we talked on the grass near the parking lot?
I would never have thought that, but now, my 20 years in the military, there are things that I saw that I really can't talk about that tells me and has shown to me that our government is capable of anything. Okay, so finding this out, that they knew that you and I and other people were where we were that night, it does not surprise me. With the work that you do, and as accurate as the information you find and as hard as you work to verify the truth of what you report on, I can imagine that you are watched quite a bit, you know?
We're supposed to be American citizens protected by the Constitution and the Bill of Rights. We are not doing anything that is wrong.
No, I don't think we are either.
And you were never asked in your service for the United States Navy to sign a non-disclosure agreement about any of those efforts in Antarctica, correct?
Yeah. At the time when I was in the service and those incidents happened, we were verbally told we couldn't say anything, to forget about it, but I never signed the non-disclosure of anything that I did while I was serving in the Navy.
In Antarctica?
In Antarctica, yes.
Now let's play an excerpt from our original January 30th, 2015 interview.
Here's this huge hole in the ice, almost like a cave entrance, but it was large enough that you could fly a C-130 into it, a hole that went down. We were told not to fly that area, but we continued our mission and picked up our medical emergency and turned around and had to come back to South Pole to refuel. And when we got close to that air sampling again, we were told, deviate this way so many miles and then turn back on course. Made our way back to McMurdo, and the entire crew was told to report to the skipper's office. We all got sat in this room, and this guy came in that nobody had seen before and said, okay, you guys saw this thing? You didn't see it.
And he means the big, deep hole.
Yes, big hole in the ice that was supposedly the air sampling station. We were told to not talk about it ever, and that area was considered off limits for research.
In your email to me, you wrote, talk among the flight crews was that there is a UFO base at the South Pole, and some of the crew heard talk from some of the scientists working at the pole of EBAs, an acronym for extraterrestrial biological entities, working with the scientists at their air sampling camp, which is the large hole in the ice.
Yeah. We're told not to talk among ourselves officially, but the guys, after a flight, you have a few beers, and it's like, yeah, I heard these scientists talking about that there's some guys there at Pole that were working with these strange-looking men. They weren't saying, alien or extraterrestrial, whatever, and that the air sampling station was actually a joint base with the scientists and the ETs.
In your email to me, you said, quote, none of the scientists would talk to any of the crew on the plane, and they looked scared.
That was a mission. It was probably a 2.5-hour flight from McMurdo, in the middle of nowhere. We put this crew out there McMurdo had lost communication with. You're supposed to check in every so often by radio to tell McMurdo that everything's okay. So after they hadn't been heard of, we got sent back out there. Nobody around. All the equipment was still there, but the entire camp was gone. We called McMurdo on their radio to make sure that the radio was working, and we could hear McMurdo fine. A week later, supposedly these scientists had gotten back to camp and wanted to be picked up. And we went back in there after we got airborne. I went back looking around, and these people's faces, they look scared is what they look. And I asked my loadmaster, where have these guys been? And he said, I don't know, I can't get any words out of them. Blank stares, and he offered them food and stuff, and like nobody would take anything. And so we get back to McMurdo and unload their gear. It was put in isolation. Kind of weird. Why is that stuff being isolated? With everybody talking in the camp, all the civilians. Yeah, those guys went back to Christchurch, and they had a special flight for these guys. And nobody said anything.
Am I understanding correctly that each of the science groups that you guys flew in and out of the Antarctic base, they knew they were going to work with extraterrestrial biological entities down in that big hole?
What somebody had overheard was that there was an installation, joint venture, at Pole, not necessarily at the South Pole Station, but in the vicinity of South Pole. They were conducting some kind of project.
Between extraterrestrials and the human scientists.
Correct. It's like, man, what did these guys see? Why were they gone for 2 weeks that nobody knew where they were? It makes you wonder, it's like, okay, so what is our government and other governments doing that we don't know about that's going on down there with visitors from somewhere else, and what possibly is still going on down there?
Brian, what can anyone do to an agency that calls up from anonymous voices who do not even identify themselves by name or agency they are calling from, and then try deliberately to intimidate?
I don't know what we can do. If the government says it's not going to happen or shut up, that's what happens. I think people just have to come forward and tell what they know. It's like one person stands up in a crowd and says, no, I'm not going to do it. And you know what? Somewhere in that crowd, there are other people that feel the exact same way. And if one more person stands up and one more person stands up, pretty soon you've got a crowd, and we need to get back into that kind of mindset and make the government serve us and not us serve the government.
Brian, would you please read the email that you sent to me?
Okay. Linda, I was listening to your reporting, Bill Tompkins, and his knowledge about the alien races and the agendas they are attempting to carry out. I started to realize the things that my father had told me in his ending years of life that now made total sense to me. His account of the times during World War II, flying bombing missions over Germany, the balls of light, which he called Foo Fighters, his two missions that he thought he and his crew were not going to make it back from Germany because his plane had been shot up so badly, flying only on two engines. And when he thought that everything was lost, he told me that he turned to his co-pilot, and there sitting between them was the image of Christ. He told me that Christ put his hand over his hand on the throttles of his B-17 and pushed him up to full power. This next thing my dad then said is what he was engulfed in a white light so bright he could not see anything in the cockpit of his bomber. And then the next instant, his plane was over the English Channel, and he had lost several hours of time. As my dad was telling me about this mission, he was upset and crying. I had never seen my dad ever cry before in my life. Until the day my dad died, he would not say any more about that mission. He would tell me about his other missions flying over Germany as many times as I wanted to hear them. That one, only once did he talk about. That mission, I believe, was one of the Foo Fighter encounters he had, and his crew may have been abducted and then returned to the aircraft just before the plane reached England. Our family lineage is Nordic and Norwegian and goes back to the Viking clans. My dad's side of the family are all blue-eyed blondes, and my mom's side is German descent. What your guest, Bill Tompkins, was telling me about Nordic reptilian connection and some of the Nordic-type alien species has me wondering if my family is involved with that somehow. My dad also talked about his dreams of what he called reptile men during his time flying missions over Germany. He would laugh that off and say that he probably read too many comic books as a kid, but I think it scared him, and he had encounters also with the reptilians during one or more of his flights over Germany. I think all this means something, and hearing Bill Tompkins has triggered a better understanding of things that have happened.
Bill Tompkins, who Brian is referencing, is now a 93-year-old retired aerospace engineer and author of a recent book entitled Selected by Extraterrestrials, My Life in the Top Secret World of UFOs, Think Tanks, and Nordic Secretaries. Mr. Tompkins' extraordinary life included flying all over the United States in the 1940s to secret sites at Lockheed, Northrop, Douglas, and other aerospace companies, and top universities that were doing secret work for the United States Navy. In May 2016, I did an interview with him for my news website, earthfiles.com. Bill Tompkins told me as a young man in early 1942, he was inducted into the U.S. Navy, where he was asked to make scale models from photographs of extraterrestrial aerial craft the various corporate Navy contractors had learned about through government intelligence operatives that included Nazi SS manufacturing of anti-gravity spacecraft. Tompkins also learned that behind Adolf Hitler in the Second World War, there were two different species of reptilian humanoids. One included what he called Dracos from the Draco constellation, about 12 light years from Earth, and known as a satellite of our own Milky Way galaxy. According to Bill Tompkins, Navy intelligence learned that humanoid reptilians from the Draco constellation were manipulating Hitler to annihilate the Hebrews on Earth and populate the whole planet with blonde, blue-eyed Nordics that were another type of extraterrestrial under the control of the Draco reptilians. Bill Tompkins and his naval superiors were very confused by the idea that hostile reptiles and beautiful blonde humanoids were working together to take over planet Earth. Adding to their confusion were other beautiful Nordic humanoids that helped the Allies to defeat Hitler. That complex and insidious chess game haunted everyone then and still does today.
The Wilkes-Land gravity anomaly is seldom spoken about in the ufology community. However, sitting deep under an ice shelf of this isolated part of Antarctica lies one of the greatest mysteries on Earth. This is known as the Wilkes-Land gravity anomaly. In March of 2002, the rocket launch vehicle blasted off, launching the Plesetsk spaceport. While in orbit, it launches its payload, which consists of 2 satellites known as the Grace twin satellites. The purpose of the Grace satellites was to monitor the overall gravity of the Earth. Specifically, it was used to find what are called gravity anomalies, or locations on the Earth where the gravity is actually different from the rest of the planet. Many people believe that the gravity field around Earth is all the same. It's all even. But this is actually not true. The Earth is shrouded in varying land masses of varying sizes, and this has a distinct effect on how gravity works. The larger the land mass, the more mass that it has, and the stronger the gravitational pull it will have on the satellites above. Certain tools, like the Grace satellites, have a number of applications for studying these gravitational anomalies, whether it be for locating volcanoes or potential earthquake areas, and even for finding oil. However, during one of the flybys over Antarctica, the Grace satellite noticed a very strange gravitational anomaly. In a virtually barren, blank spot of the icy continent, where there are absolutely no surface features or anything out of the ordinary, a gravitational spike was detected where the gravity was found to reach 300 miles up into space and pull down on these satellites much harder than any of the other areas around the continent, which then posed a very mysterious question for scientists. What could be buried deep underneath this ice shelf that had such a mass to it that it would have the gravitational force that was detected by the Grace satellites? A geophysicist from the Ohio State University by the name of Ralph von Friese was part of the team who actually made this startling discovery. Using various pieces of radar equipment, they revealed a 320-kilometer wide plug of dense mantle material, more than 1.6 kilometers beneath Wilkes-Land. This mass concentration, or mascon, can be caused by an upswelling of denser material from the Earth's mantle after a massive impact. So this was their first clue, that this very well could be a massive impact crater of some sort. Ralph von Friese is quoted as saying, "If I saw this mascon signal on the moon, I'd expect to see a crater around it. When they looked at the airborne radar images of the area, they found what they say looks like a crater, a circular ridge some 500 kilometers wide running around the mascon. It could be the biggest impact crater found on Earth. The region of dense rock is certainly circular, but other researchers say that this thick mass could have been caused by volcanic magma that had swelled up from the deep, creating this mass. However, it should be noted that this specific area of the mantle is actually much thinner than the outside surrounding areas of the continent, which quickly dispels any theory of volcanic activity being the cause. Aside from identifying this 300-kilometer wide mass buried deep underneath the ice, they also found that this object was actually inside of a much larger ring-like structure.
There's a description of an underwater path indicating how to get into the inner world of Agartha. That's the inner world. That's through the ice. That's the entire area that Admiral Byrd spoke about. Now, what's interesting to this is that when I use these specific names of these different Germans, the first guy that I mentioned is pretty important, because unless you understand that H. Kohlmeier was the guy that was the head of the entire Nazi advanced technology and secret division. In other words, nothing happened in that realm without him signing off. But what's important is this, that quote unquote, I recommend within the next 6 months a careful and covert selection of volunteers for the development of the new territories of the German Reich in NEU, which was short for New Schwabenland, within the next 6 months with the powers of the specially formed Commission for Recruitment in the Wehrmacht, Luftwaffe, Kriegsmarine, and SS units for Swabia. Now, it goes on to show, and this is the most mind-blowing thing that I've ever seen. It says this part of the Reichsdeutsche map from the cave Earth gives a step-by-step guide on how to reach the inner world of Agartha using a U-boat. The German U-boats of type 11 or 13 were very advanced for their time, but nothing compared to the 21 and the 23 series. The Reichsdeutsch were free in their thoughts and their spirit. They were not intellectual slaves like the billions of people today in the world this gentleman is being quoted as. But it basically says diving as in a submarine with a coordinate exactly cutting 68 degrees southwest and 1 degree easter length at a depth of 400 meters. Now, obviously, 400 meters is what, 12 to 1,400 feet. It goes on to say descent from the point of descent with half ride, a starboard slope of 10 degrees with a bow load angle of inclinations of 5, distance 188 nautical miles, preset depth 500 meters. And it says due to the quarter running, pressure on the ship's body is less important during maneuvering. Evidently, the tightness of the tunnel offsets some of the pressure, and I don't know how that works, but that's what it's referring to. Appearance, ballast with a tail trim angle of incidence 23 degrees with a port position of 22 degrees, 190 meters upward, distance 75 nautical miles. And then it basically says on point 9, I'm just giving you a couple points, drive and to Agartha, full speed, look straight ahead until the new light is settled. Change of magnetic poles, the movements of the compass needles and measuring instruments are negligible. So here we have the instructions, and it says, are strictly to be followed.
With some evidence of this coming to light in recent years, purporting to show various entrances built into the side of mountains that hold a saucer shape, and are not to mention at a very high altitude, which begs the question, how exactly would you enter these entrances without something that could fly and that was the same shape as the entrance itself?
One thing I can tell you was that there was a massive spiritual attack on my and our team. 3 of us are Christians. We were not able to fly out due to unnaturally bad weather. And when we did, it was the most dangerous flight I've ever been on. By the way, this man is an engineer scientist who flies all over the world. And he said this, I have never prayed so much and so long. Only after fasting and praying and then praising God do we break through and we're able to fly to Troll, that's a Norwegian base, to fly back home. On this flight, it nearly went terribly wrong in so many ways. I was praying in the Spirit, praying in tongues the whole flight, as this was a huge spiritual presence I haven't felt before. You talk about God allowing the hidden to be exposed. This was the first trip ever when they did not, now listen to this. This is the first trip ever when they did not have the compulsory ceremony to Poseidon, also Neptune. And he said, and you can, by the way, go look at that, Poseidon or Neptune crossing and ceremony on Wikipedia. I was praying and fasting as we crossed this line. It is a huge, very spiritual blinding you bring on yourself by allowing it. In other words, he's saying that up until this time, people actually have to go through somewhat of a spiritual and mystical and mythical initiation. And so you can look it up. It's called the ceremony of Poseidon, or it's also called the ceremony of Neptune. He said, I ran across many different, I'm going to hide this intentionally, intelligence people, and many people talking about interesting things. Well, obviously, some of those interesting things have got to kind of be kept under wraps for a while. But when you talk about interesting things, when you talk about unusual things, and when you talk about the events taking place down there, it's pointing.
This is the book of Enoch. I was reading in the first book of Enoch, chapter 18. And this is where the angel Uriel is taking Enoch and showing him some very interesting things. And I'm going to share with you some of the words that I read here in Enoch, and then you'll see why it became very interesting to me. If we go down to, say, verse 4 and begin there, it says, "And I saw the winds which turned the sky and caused the disk of the sun and all the stars to set. And I saw the winds on the earth which support the clouds. And I saw the path of the angels. I saw at the end of the earth the firmament of heaven above. And I went towards the south." Okay, so he goes to the end of the earth. And he speaks about going towards the south. "And it was burning day and night, where there were 7 mountains of precious stones, and 3 towards the east and 3 towards the south." Now, I begin to think about this. He's talking about 7 mountains, but 3 go to the east and 3 go to the south. And he's talking about going towards the south. And I'm thinking to myself, okay, and he's talking about it being that it burns day and night. It was burning day and night. In other words, the sun is not setting. And I'm thinking to myself, well, the South Pole, that describes the South Pole like no other place on Earth. The sun just doesn't really ever set. It's always daylight. And so it really caught my attention. But then he mentioned about the 7 mountains. And of course he talks about the stones, etc. But then he says east and 3 go to the south. Well, that really got my attention. So I thought to myself, okay, is there a place down at the Antarctica that would kind of match this type of description? Well, oddly enough, there is. It's Mount Vincent. Now, you have to keep in mind what you're looking at here on your screen. You have Mount Vincent right here. It is called the 7 Summit. There are 3 going south. Now, you would say these are 3 to the west. It's actually described as southeast and southwest. But keeping in mind, when Enoch went here, the earth had not been tilted off its axis. So therefore, north and south, east and west was a bit different, right? And if you take and tilt the earth back the way it would have been, this will go just like that. And then you would have the 3 peaks, as it speaks about here, and we have the summit here, 3 peaks here. Those would go down to the south, just as he describes, and these here, the 3, would go to the east, just as he describes there. The 7 mountains, the 7 summits, and 3 to the east and 3 to the south. That really began to make sense. But the words here in Enoch get a little bit more strange, though. And as I read on, it says, "And those towards the east were of colored of stone and was of pearl, and one of a healing stone, and those towards the south of a red stone. And the middle one reached to heaven like the throne of the Lord, and stibium, and the top of the throne was a sapphire. And I saw a burning fire, and what was in all the mountains." Now, keeping in mind, the middle one was the tall one. And of course, at Mount Vincent, that's exactly the way it is. Mount Vincent is the tallest mountain. Now, I can't say that this is conclusively correct. I'm putting this here before you as a conjecture, something for you to think about, just something that I find very fascinating in line with all these anomalies that are happening at Antarctica, all the weird things that are going on. John Kerry, I mean, gosh, he did more than 1 visit down to the Antarctica here. Why? What's going on? Now, when I first looked at this, I'm thinking Planet X. They're going down there because they can see Planet X coming. All right? And maybe that has something to do with it as well. But what about some other things? I'm going to share with you some very serious things also that are going on down there that have been claimed by former military officers. Okay, so just hold on for a second here. It says, "And I saw a place there beyond the great earth. There the waters gathered together. And I saw a deep chasm of the earth with pillars of heavenly fire, and saw among them fiery pillars of heaven, which were falling as regards both height and depth. They were immeasurable. And beyond this chasm I saw a place, and it had neither the sky above it, nor the foundation of earth below it, and there was no water on it, and no birds, but it was a desert place. Now, I'm sure now when you read this part here, well, that throws that out. Must have been out in Saudi Arabia somewhere. Maybe not. Maybe not, guys. Let's take a look at something else here that's very, very interesting. All right, let's go actually to the 7summits.com website. And this is about Antarctica, and it's about Mount Vincent, and it talks about it being the tallest mountain, etc. Let me read to you the Antarctica facts, though. Besides the mountain summit, if you go down here to say about right up under the blue right here on your screen, the snowfall in Antarctica is so minimal that the continent has been called the world's coldest desert. The interior receives less than 3 centimeters, in other words, less than 1 inch of precipitation a year, making it the driest continent on Earth. The Antarctic dry valleys in Victoria Land are among the driest places on Earth. Some scientists believe that no rain has fallen there for 2 million years. Astronauts have visited the dry valleys because of their similarity to lunar landscapes. Isn't that interesting? They call it the coldest desert on Earth. Well, maybe Enoch has got something when he said it was a desert. All right? As he called it, there was no water on it and no birds, but it was a desert place. Well, there are no birds. There are no penguins when you get that deep into Antarctica. There's just no life at all. And a terrible thing I saw there, 7 stars like the great burning mountains, and like a Spirit questioned me. The angel said, "This is the place of the end of heaven and earth. This is the prison for the stars of heaven and the host of heaven and the stars which roll over the fire. These are the ones which transgress the commandment of the Lord from the beginning of their rising, because they did not come out at their proper times. And he was angry with them and bound them until the time of consummation of their sin in the year of mystery." And I, Uriel, we go into chapter 19 here, real quick here, just the first verse, said to me, "The spirits of the angels who were promiscuous with women will stand here, and they, assuming many forms, made men unclean, and will lead men astray so that they sacrifice to demons as gods." Now, if you notice, that is a continuation. They're not dead. They're still there. And they do what? They will lead men astray so that they sacrifice to demons as gods. They sacrifice to demons as gods.